Just before we start, I might just get everyone to pop onto mute, just so we don't have any background noise as we're going through the session. And you're welcome to have your camera on if you wish to, but it's optional. We are recording this evening's session, so it's up to you whether you would like to be on the screen or not. So I'll leave that up to you. It does mean that the internet connection is more stable if we have cameras off. So, but I'll leave that up to you. I just want to welcome everybody this evening. Thanks for taking time out to join us to learn how to advocate for neurodiverse children. We're presenting the session this evening, myself and Amanda, to support parents to advocate effectively for neurodiverse children. So to begin this evening, we'll start with an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we all meet today. We pay our respects to their elders past and present, and further acknowledge the important role that Indigenous people have within our communities across Australia. Before we begin going through it's really a conversation this evening with Amanda and I, and we will have some interaction in the chat box. So we won't be necessarily having people come on to talk, but we'll just see how we go for time and numbers of however many people join us this evening. But I just wanted to share with you a few definitions just before we start talking. And I suppose the one definition that we need to clarify is that of parent, because we know that parents can be any caregiver of a child, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a biological parent. And I often refer to this definition of parent by Dr. Debbie Pusher, who some of you may have heard of. If you haven't, I'd recommend you have a look at her work. She talks about parents as not solely someone who is biological, but someone who is a parent. Could be an auntie and uncle or other type of caregiver. And it really does mean anyone who parents a child. So just to clarify, when we talk about parents throughout the conversation, that's what we mean. So a couple of other definitions that we wanted to share with you too. The reason that we called it, we use the term neurodiversity because we know that there are many children who learn differently, and the description or the definition from the Diversity Council of Australia describes neurodiversity as all of us having different brains, and acknowledging that diversity is pretty much the way that people process things, much like gender diversity, cultural diversity, ethnic diversity. So we all know throughout our own education and learning that we all think differently. And even now, the way that we learn, the more and more we learn about the brain, the more we understand how we all are different. But when we talk about neurodivergent children, the definition, once again, from the Diversity Council of Australia, is when you have an actual diagnosis of neuroprocessing differences. So this can include autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and Tourette syndrome, and are often co-occurring. So I just wanted to share those definitions with you just so you have an idea of who we're really talking about this evening when it comes to our children. And we all know that all our children are special to us, and we want to be able to support them as much as we can. And that's why we've all gathered here this evening to learn a bit more about what our role is when we're advocating for our children. So what we're going to be covering tonight is we're going to discuss some of the challenges that Amanda has come across when working with parents and their children, when advocating for their children in different schools. We both have different experiences in helping parents and supporting them to advocate for their child, and understanding that advocacy is a really important role that we have as parents. But often we don't know how to advocate, or we're not really taught how to actually advocate in a positive way that provides us with an opportunity to partner with schools and work together to support our children. So we're going to be looking at the challenges and then exploring different opportunities and ways that we can perhaps support you to be able to advocate more effectively for your children or other children that you may be aware of, and how to build those positive partnerships with schools. And then towards the end, we'll do some Q&A. But throughout the session, I invite you to pop any questions that you have that you think of while we're talking into the chat box. And I just ask that everyone be respectful with their questions and towards the presenters and to other people in the chat just before we begin, so that we all can, I guess, leave this session having some more insight and understanding of what other people are perhaps experiencing and how we can all support each other through these different challenges. So I'll just unshare so we can all see Amanda and myself. Now I'll just change the view. Just bear with me.
While Rachel's doing that, hopefully everyone can hear me. I just wanted to mention that I have had nothing but trouble with my internet all weekend and even today, and in working with students. So I apologise up front if I cut in and out. Hopefully it's out of my control, but hopefully it doesn't happen. But I just wanted to warn people that that could happen as we're talking tonight. So apologies if it does.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll just introduce Amanda and myself briefly before we start having a conversation. A few people have added where they're from in the chat box, and it looks like we're mostly from Victoria. If anyone hasn't done that yet, please pop in where you're from. Just introducing you to Amanda. She is a good friend of mine. We met each other through, I guess, mutual interests in supporting students and parents in schools, and we both have worked for several years in schools with teachers, and Amanda is an experienced academic life coach, executive function coach, and organising expert. She's very passionate about ensuring children are equipped with simple and effective organisational time management and study skills, as they are key to their success and enjoyment at school and in life. She's a regular speaker at a variety of conferences, workshops, and panels, and is becoming well known for her expert knowledge and experience. And she's very good at providing practical tips, strategies, and ideas for her audiences, particularly parents. And they appreciate her content-rich tips and strategies, enabling them to be better equipped to face the challenges they and their children confront today. And like Amanda, I too am a life coach, and I support parents and teachers to work in partnership. And a lot of my work stems from parent engagement and really supporting parents to understand what their role is when their children begin school and as they go with them on the journey through school, and also supporting teachers in understanding how to work more effectively and closely with parents as partners. So that's just a little bit of background about the two of us. Now I'm just going to fiddle with this view because it's not cooperating for me at the moment. Okay. All right. So we'll just start the conversation really with looking at what some of the challenges are that you come across, Amanda. And my first question, I guess, is what are the current challenges in schools that you do come across for families with neurodiverse children?
I guess, look, I've definitely seen it. First of all, I'd like to just say I've definitely seen quite a big change in the time that when I first started working in this space to working in this space now. And I think it's heading in certainly in a positive direction, but I still think there's a lot more work that needs to be done in this space. So in the first instance, I think it's very much around, I guess, having an understanding of what the challenges are that individuals have is probably first and foremost. And again, I think schools and teachers are generally getting better at that. I still think there's some roadblocks there with some schools, or not necessarily roadblocks. It's more around probably, an education of different needs and different ways to support these children. I think it's also around, the education that our teachers have as well. So I think there's a lot of professionals out there now, ourselves included, Rachel, where we're trying to continue to educate not only parents but teachers and all of those that we come in contact with, that ideally it's about working together as a team and in partnership, as you've already said before, so that we can support everyone along the journey. Yeah. So I think they're probably the key challenges. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I guess in terms of teacher training, it has been, I suppose, with a lot more children presenting as neurodiverse over the last few years, the training that teachers have had has possibly been fairly limited. And so in a lot of ways, teachers may be playing catch up. And because we know every child in every classroom is different, what they're navigating every day is very challenging, especially when some children are presenting with very challenging behaviours as well, and they haven't really had that sort of training to be able to manage. And I'm hearing a lot from schools too that they're really seeking that training now. And of course, we know that there's a lot of specialists out there who are trying to support families. However, it's quite challenging for families to actually access that sort of support because the waiting list is so long. And so there's, a lot of challenges in itself in just getting some support. But I'd like to hear from our audience as well. What, if you'd be able to pop in the chat box, what sort of challenges you're seeing in, I guess, engaging with the school to be able to support your child. If you can just pop an answer in the chat box, we can perhaps.
Yeah, I think the other thing, Rachel, while people are putting some comments in the chat, which we clearly welcome, because we want this to be a discussion and be able to really support you guys. But I think the other one is very much around the funding. And the resources, is another key area. And, there's been a new funding model just come into place, particularly in Victoria here, which I'm still trying to get my head around as well. I went to a funding meeting a couple of weeks ago for the first one to support a family and advocate with a family. So it's around that. And obviously we're really struggling with teacher resources, full stop. So some of the schools that I've dealt with, they've got dedicated, wellbeing teams or resources to support, the children, neurodiverse sort of background and with challenges. But then there's other schools where, that might be the leading teacher who's got that hat on, as well as trying to teach in the classroom and a whole lot of other things too. So it can be really challenging for schools, in that sense as well.
Are you able to elaborate at all on the funding model, or is it too early to explain?
It's really probably too early. I really don't understand the process. And it's interesting because I actually got a feedback survey following the meeting that I went to via the education department, came to me the other day, and it was asking me about the information that I'd been provided prior to attending the meeting and all sorts. And I had no knowledge. The school had nothing. None of us had anything. And so we weren't really able to prepare other than we knew it was happening and so forth. I do have an understanding of the actual process now and the areas that they model it against. And it is basically, this is obviously in a secondary school. I don't know whether it's different in a primary school, so I can't quite elaborate yet on that front. But at the secondary school level, we looked at 31 key areas or criteria, if you like, and we had to evaluate that on behalf of the child, and we had to things in total, right through from not really relevant to obviously really substantial and an essential. So it was quite an interesting sort of process to go through. But I think, that's something that I think, we're going to learn more about, and I certainly will learn more about, moving forward. I actually hadn't been involved in a funding session previously, so it was great to be invited by the school and on behalf of the family. So I've got a really good relationship with this school in particular, and it's fantastic that we can work as part of a team to support that individual child. And we welcomed that partnership as part of that process.
So the school offered you to actually come into the session. Are they offering that information to specific parents or for all parents?
This child obviously needed funding, and it's something that we have pushed right from when he transitioned from primary school to secondary school. So but again, like your comment before you said about resources and access, we're in October, and this is the first thing that we've put in place. Now, we're very fortunate that this school recognises that this child will get funding, and has already been supporting this child through their extra support in class and so forth as well, so that they can, I guess the funding will probably be backdated to a degree, I'm not sure entirely, but the school have been really good in what they've already provided. They weren't waiting till the funding happened in a sense. So that was really great to see.
Yeah. And so in terms of the training that teachers are having, are you aware of anything that is happening in schools at the moment around supporting teachers, particularly, I suppose, with understanding the needs of neurodivergent children, particularly? And
it's very, very haphazard, I think.
Is it?
That's happening? And I think each school is doing their own thing in my experience, and sometimes it's individual teacher training, sometimes they are bringing personnel in to educate. I participated in a podcast myself about 3 or 4 weeks ago for a school here in Melbourne, and that was as part of a professional development experience that they provide to their teachers. So I talked on executive function and what the challenges are with that. So that was a great initiative that school has been putting in place to support their teachers. But again, I don't think there's any consistent training. And I think we almost have to go back to the education of our teachers, when they're coming through that university stage. And again, this is something I've argued, and you and I've talked about this a lot. It's not just around this area. It's things like organisation, time management, which obviously link into executive function and bits and pieces as well. So there's a whole gamut of areas where I think that can be provided better as well.
Yeah, including cognitive skills and improving cognitive learning. A couple of people have put a comment in the chat box pretty much similar to what you just shared, which was that not all teachers are across the information. So some teachers are, some teachers aren't. And that becomes a challenge, I suppose, especially when if you don't have a whole school approach. And I understand that schools, to fund the professional learning across the whole school is quite challenging. But if it's not a whole school approach in understanding the needs of various children in the school, then it can be problematic for parents, particularly if they're moving into the next year level and they have to really work with the teacher to help them get to know their child and their needs. Have you come across any challenges around that where some schools are quite good at doing that? And I've actually witnessed that myself with a few schools where they bring the child into the classroom, familiarise them with the environment and work through ways to actually support the child with the parents and getting an understanding of the family and really engaging with the family context and what those needs are prior to the year starting. And then they bring them in early before the year starts as well, just to get them used to the children in the classroom and all of those sorts of things. So have you come across that as well?
Yeah, look, a little bit, but I still think there's a long way to go in that space as well. And obviously right now I'm working on transition of year 6 students into secondary school. So that's a key area that I do a lot of work on. And as part of that journey, particularly kids that have extra challenges, I always say to parents, it's very important that they get extra transition days to go along. And some schools provide that already. But if they don't, I generally encourage, an extra visit prior to the formal transition day so that they can at least, get a bit of a sense and take away some of the unknown and worry that, is going on in a child's mind about what to expect and so on. So I think again, we've got to get a little bit better at that whole transition space between primary to secondary, or even kinder to primary and primary to secondary. And then I think even from secondary to university, I do a lot of work in that space as well. And there's a lot of students that have the challenges that don't really know what they can do and how they can then be supported in that space too. So I think we need to continue to get better at that and advocate, as part of that. And I think and this is why we're having this conversation tonight, that a lot of parents don't know, what you can and can't do. And I think that's the real challenge at the end of the day. And I can see some of those comments there about, put an IEP in place or provisions have been provided, but they're very generic and they're not tailored. And I think, going back to your point right from the start, Rachel, everyone is different. And whilst some things are the same, they still need to listen to the families or the supports in the child's care team to know exactly what's going to work and what's not going to work. And one of the statements that I really like, and you may have come across him as well, and he was just actually in this country at the moment, Ross Green, and some of you might have come across Ross Green previously, but he was here doing his workshops, and he basically talks about how no child sets out to misbehave or not want to do well, and all children will do well if they can. And I think that's a really basic message to have in place, that with the right supports around them, they can continue to thrive and grow. But without the right supports, then that's where we have those challenges and things that can come into place.
Yeah. So in terms of teacher engagement and I suppose school staff, school leadership engagement with families, in your work where you have to actually go into the school with the family, what do you see as the challenge for schools to engage with parents? Is there another reason why, as we're seeing in the chat box, that there is not an extra effort made to personalise and rather than be generic? Do you see that there are particular reasons for that?
No, I think it's probably resources. I think it all comes down often to resources, and I think that's the key challenge. And I think even this school where I went into this funding meeting this year, to be honest, they did participate in the transition from 6 to 7, which was obviously this time last year. But even at the start of the year, it took a lot of perseverance from myself, to be honest, because unfortunately the parent also needed support, who I support as well. So it's not just the child in this instance, I'm supporting both of them. And so I was the one having to do a lot of the legwork in terms of following up and getting the school on board and making sure things were happening. And as the years progressed, it's really started to really form a great relationship and mutual respect happening, that we can communicate at any point in time. And I think this is one of the challenges for parents, because parents often not always know what to do, but often do know what to do and do know what's particularly best for their child and try and communicate it, but often get stopped or seen as that hysterical parent, or going too much overboard, and it's like, leave it to us, we know how to do it, we can manage it. And I think it's those schools that have more of an open mind for us all to work together is where it will work better and be more successful for everybody.
So when you work with parents to advocate for their child, and you actually have to face those blockages, how long would you persevere before you would recommend that they choose or seek out another school?
generally get a bit of a, you can generally get a bit of a gut feel. And again, you and I have talked about this before, gut reaction is really, really important, I think, in so many ways as well. And I think you generally have a sense of that right from the start. Even in searching for a school, you generally know, your children better than anybody, and you generally know, is it going to work or is it not going to work? And obviously there's options when it doesn't work, you can change. And sometimes it's easy and sometimes obviously it's not. But I think it's worth, giving it. And again, it's going to depend on what year level the child's in too, right? Because there's certain times where you can persevere a bit longer than perhaps, if you've got a child going into those senior years and you're not getting the supports that you really need, you're probably going to have to move them sooner rather than later, or else they're going to miss that opportunity, into those senior years. So it just depends on where they're at. But I think it's definitely worth giving it a fair shot. And in most instances, even when I've had to be involved, if I get roadblocks at a certain point at the start, I keep persevering as well. And I think sometimes, coming from a professional point of view, even though I'm a parent of my own children, it's a different experience that I get than perhaps a parent trying to do exactly the same thing will get. And it shouldn't be like that, but unfortunately, it often can be like that as well.
Yeah. So for parents who have children in primary and some that may have children in secondary school, what do you see the differences are at the moment in terms of the willingness to work with parents in primary school as opposed to secondary school? And how do you think that advocating for your child actually has an impact in terms of the way that schools do come on board and are willing to actually create change? Because I think the secondary system, in my experience, I have had parents come to me to share that they are so worried about sending their children to secondary school because of that fact, that there hasn't been as much support in secondary level for neurodivergent children. And has that changed in your view? Do you think that has changed because of parents advocating?
Look, as I said at the start, I think there definitely has been change, and I'm grateful for seeing the change that is happening in schools. And again, not all schools, but to be honest, with the students, I guess that we've got currently that we're working with right now, we haven't, in the last 12 months, we probably really haven't experienced any real blockages, which is a positive, right? So
yeah.
Most schools have been open, and whilst some are a lot more on board and they have a bit more understanding, at least we're getting some further progression, I guess, than say 3 or 4 years ago, when we were still doing a lot of the educating as to trying to indicate why we should be doing this and so on. And I think I can't say that there's necessarily been a difference. Oh, look, there probably is a little bit of a difference between primary and secondary school in my experience. Obviously, I don't do a lot of work pre-grade 6, so I can't really probably comment too much on that, other than when we work with children that are 6 and up, we know where they've come from and if they've had that support in the through the primary school years. And generally, in my experience with most of the parents and children that we work with, they have generally had that in place, unless they've had a later diagnosis, obviously, as well. So whereas at the secondary school level, as I said, we haven't really had too many challenges of late. And generally when we go into a school as well, and I guess this is something for parents too, it's very much around, it does often when I ask, who should we get in touch with, I'll ask a parent, who are the key contacts that you've had relationships with? And it's often, perhaps the coordinator, like the year level coordinator. It's probably someone in the wellbeing team. There might be a house leader involved. So often when I go in to communicate with a school in the first instance, I will make sure I get in touch with all of those rather than just one person, because that can limit the chances of actually getting in there as well. So my advice is very much to be in touch with, the broader group, and then let the school almost, direct you as to where you should be. Sometimes I find you might get directed to one of those people, but other times it might still continue to be that whole group and that whole team that want to be involved as well.
Yes.
So it really just depends. The other thing that I guess I want to just highlight just on the back of that as well is we've done this in the last probably 2 years with a lot of the students we've worked with. If we haven't necessarily had the buy-in from the school, what we have done is worked on putting together an information sheet on behalf of a child, which highlights their challenges, their strengths, obviously their interests, a whole lot of bits and pieces, and even then provided some strategies that we believe that will work for that child in that school. So that has been a really useful and welcome guide with some of those schools as well. And then that's where I guess an IEP or a learning plan has often been developed from off the back of that. And look, to be honest, and I don't know, as parents out there and your own experience, Rachel, but so many schools have so many different IEPs or learning plans, and some of them are pretty good and brief. And this is the other challenge for teachers. Teachers aren't going to wade through pages and pages and pages of information. They just want it simple, to the point, and educate them like that. So I've even worked with schools and said, look, I think you need to cut this down or change this or what have you. So I'm always trying to educate about the best way to do it too.
Yeah. So it's about being proactive and really sharing your parent knowledge of your child with the school up front. So then that's a very positive approach, and really sharing what you know about your child and what their needs are in a non-confronting way. But it's also about, instead of, I guess, going into the school unprepared, it's about having a plan and having some questions ready and some solutions, going in with, okay, let me think about how I can actually work with the school to support my child, but also how you can work with us to support our child and your student. And I myself had an experience with my own daughter who was trying to drop out of school, and I had to advocate for her to stay at school somehow, and I had to work out a plan of how that would work. And it was really up to me to actually do that, to go to the school and talk to them about why she was behaving a certain way, why she wasn't enjoying school, and what the solutions were. And we decided to provide suggestions to the school about getting her off site a couple of days a week, and being able to be around people that were good influences on her. And the only way that was going to happen was for me and my husband to actually make those suggestions. So sometimes it just takes a little bit more, I guess, of clarity of thinking to be able to prepare a plan and organize a meeting, and so that you can actually have those conversations that are productive, and you go in with a solutions-based approach rather than seeking solutions from the school, because they may not have the solutions, even though some schools, some educators may feel like they have to have all the answers, but then that's not really working in a partnership. So how would you suggest that parents prepare, apart from the plan that you just talked about? Do you have any other ideas or strategies that you use with parents, or that you suggest to parents?
I guess in our experience, obviously, when we work with students one-on-one, we obviously work as a team with the family and the parents, and we work with any other health professionals. So often I'm part of care teams, whereby there might be a psychologist, there might be an OT, there might be a behaviour support person. I tend to be the contact that liaises with the school. There could be a psychologist, there's a whole lot of people. And so generally through that's how we sort of approach that. But I think the key challenge for a lot of parents is really just how and where and what's the best way for them to go in there. And like yourself, Rachel, I've had the same experience personally, and with one of my own children, and and even I do what I do, and it was an interesting experience in that I learned so much going through that process, which obviously helped me with my journey with working with students as well, because sometimes there are options available that we don't even know about. Or like what I'm talking about here, for instance, is, in the senior years at secondary school, they tell you you've got to do X number of subjects and you've got to pass so many and all of this sort of stuff, when really you don't actually have to pass that many overall. And we realized that, and so it was able to help take pressure off and bits and pieces, but no one told you that. And so
Yes.
there's things like that. So I think it's really hard for parents, and I mean, as I said, even doing what I do, to really be able to know and to know what those options potentially are. So I guess what I would be advising is this is where I guess this is why we're running this webinar tonight in particular, but I would be advising, if you know other parents or families who have been through different experiences at schools and so forth, learning from them as to what some of the options are, or what the schools have been prepared to do, so that you can put together your own plan about how you can potentially, approach it. And I think that's probably the biggest thing.
Yeah. Yeah, someone's just popped in the chat box that they've moved their daughter to a new secondary school, and the school seems to be engaging quite well with the family. And I like the point that you've made around the strategies being a work in progress, because as we know, sometimes we have to try new ways to do things, and sometimes it might work and sometimes it may not. But having regular feedback, modifications at various stages of learning and child development is a proactive approach by both the parents and the school. And that's the situation that we want to see, is that we sit down and have a conversation about what is going to work and what we might try, and having an understanding that we do need to be patient and really watch and observe and see how things are working, and then giving each other feedback. And just that communication can make all the difference.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think communication is something that I wrote down on my notes in preparing for tonight, was communication is key. And you and I have this conversation a lot. And I think that the one positive that I'm seeing, particularly in the Victorian education system at the moment in secondary school, has been the shift from VCAR, which is the governing body of assessments and so forth at a senior level, in year 11 and 12 primarily. Their shift with accommodations and special provisions has taken, and again, I've written a blog about this for anyone that might be interested. There's quite a detailed blog on my website about the changes. But what they've done is, it used to be on the onus of medical professionals and practitioners providing the information to the school to dictate what they could or couldn't do. So a lot of schools were very reluctant to put things into place, because it's like, VCAR won't let them get to have those accommodations in year 12. Whereas now they're bringing it right back to, if a school can demonstrate why a child needs special accommodations and provisions right from early years, and has the evidence around that, then they're going to be unlikely knocked back when they get to those senior years, because there's been the reason as to why they've needed that. So I think it's shifting, and this has only been the first year of that. So we're not, we're not, very, used to that, the new process yet. And schools have had to scramble very quickly at the start of the year to understand it and communicate it to families and bits and pieces too. But I think this is going to assist the whole change around special provisions and accommodations and supports for kids earlier on.
And of course, there are parent advocacy groups who are working with governing organisations like VCAR to create change for those students and for families. And I've had experience myself in meetings with VCAR, and they are very proactive in supporting families, which is a great, huge step forward for parent advocacy. Now, someone has popped in a question about choosing a school. So do you have any advice when choosing a primary school and a secondary school. This would apply as well if you have a neurodiverse child.
Yep. Yep. Look, again, on my website, for anyone who's interested, I do have a blog for both of those, how to choose a primary school for your child and also how to select a secondary school. The secondary school one is probably more recent than perhaps the one I've written on primary school. And I think, again, there's a whole list of questions. And I've actually got the blog open here because I thought this would come up tonight. But there's a whole lot of different things that I think you need to have in place. And particularly with, extra learning challenges and bits and pieces, you really need to understand what support programs and things are in place by the school. If your child does have severe needs, as in, they need funding, how is funding sought and allocated, and, how do they get that extra support, with their learning in the classroom environment. I noticed someone put a comment earlier about, giving easier work. Now, that's not the way to go with that. I think what schools need to be doing, and again, I've been working closely with one school in particular. We've got a child that we've been trying for nearly 12 months now, with the school's involvement as well, to try and work out if modifications actually need to be put in place. In the end, we realized that it was not the modifications that probably needed to be in place, but it was his engagement in the classroom, or his lack of engagement, which was what was going on, so that he wasn't engaged with his learning, and he was getting distracted, and he was on his device, and he was gaming and doing a whole lot of other things that he shouldn't have been doing. And was now that we've stopped that and we've changed the habit around that, and he's more engaged in the class, he can actually do more learning. So sometimes it's about trying to really work out what are the key areas that we need to focus on. And you guys know your children better than anybody. You know what has worked, perhaps what hasn't worked. A bit like what you said before, Rachel, going in with a bit of a plan of what you sort of want to ask questions about, so that you can get those answers, and then going with your gut feel again as to whether you think it's going to, and you're not going to get all those answers, up front, but hopefully you can get some reassurance that, yes, it is the right school for my child based on some of those things that you're going in with.
And what would you say to parents who really would like to have a bird's eye view of their child in the classroom so that they can gauge what's actually happening? I know that a few schools have spoken with me about the challenges. They feel the challenges are around that, because sometimes the child may misbehave just because the parent's in the room, or how would you approach that sort of situation where a parent really wants to know what's happening so that they can actually understand how to support their child?
This is where the communication with teachers really comes into play. And I think again, you know your child first and foremost, but then they know your child next best, right? Because they're the ones that see them day in, day out, and can see what's going on. So again, I think it's being open to that communication. And again, it's not always going to be necessarily what you want to hear as a parent. So being open to that, to the fact that these things could be happening. They may, and again, not all teachers really can give the full picture either. So you've got to sort of, try and find where to sit with the information that you're getting. But I don't think parents getting a bird's eye view, you're not going to get it. It just won't happen. Sometimes you can get it via another professional or another teacher who can perhaps observe the situation. But you're not going to, you won't get the true picture if, even in my early days, there was talk, and I was asked to go in, and I could go in and observe some of my students. And again, I never did it because they're not going to, how are they going to react to see me in the classroom, or me looking in through the window, or what have you? So I think it's just, again, about the communication, keeping those lines of communication open, both ways all time, and being prepared for what is positive and potentially negative at times.
And it comes back to trust as well, and trusting that the teacher is a professional, and they are trying to work through ways to manage any situations that do arise. And as parents, we also need to do the same in terms of our responses and reactions to different situations that do arise. And I suppose that's the work I do is in helping parents understand how to respond in a way that is more proactive than reactive. And that comes back to having, I guess, a sense of awareness and understanding of our own approach to different things that do happen that just come at you out of the blue, and having those skills to be able to manage those sort of stresses that do arise. And I guess in terms of building relationships with educators, with the school leadership and with teachers, what sort of suggestions do you have in terms of, I suppose, starting at a new school? I think we have a few parents on the call tonight who may have children in early childhood who are about to take the school journey and having some challenge, or I guess some concerns or worries about what to expect. How would you suggest that those parents get to know the teachers, and any other suggestions you have when they're first starting the journey?
Yeah, I think right back then, and I think it's really important to go along to information evenings, go along right from the start to as many things as you can, because that's what's really going to set the scene as to how the school potentially shares information, approaches, communicates and so forth. So I think it's that. I think it's also being involved if you are going from, say, kinder to primary, or even primary to secondary. It's communicating with the school at primary or at kinder level, because they're the ones that are going to have the communication with the school at the next stage. So it's having that communication with them, and getting their experience and advice, and in passing that whatever relevant information on right from the word go, so that you're setting that scene early, and then finding out as part of that, who are the people you need to communicate with, and just start off right, right from the word go, to ensure that your child is going to be, well, firstly, he's probably put in the right classroom in the first place, and is being supported, and so on, and it may or may not happen, because again, we all know this from experience, that schools try and do the best thing they can by students and families, and putting them in the right groups and so forth, but it doesn't always work, and things have to evolve and change over time, and so on as well. So I think it's just keeping that communication going right from the word go, and not being afraid to advocate. I think this is the thing. I think a lot of parents that I've spoken to over the years are a bit worried about how they go and do it, or what they should do, and so forth. And I think if you've got some concerns, or you want to ensure things are in place, I think it's about communicating it, but as you said, Rachel, in a positive way, rather than coming at it from a negative. And I think most schools are, and you probably can comment on this more than I can, but most schools are pretty open to having that knowledge and communication about a child.
Yeah.
And I think if it's given, I think, they'd be more than grateful often for that.
Yeah. And like you said, it starts right from the beginning in building that relationship, and not being afraid to ask questions, and to be open and flexible. And if you do hear something that you don't particularly agree with, in just continuing to have that communication and being a bit more flexible in your approach in certain circumstances. But I know, like in my work, and what I've explored in my book for parents is the fact that sometimes as parents, it's the first time we've been back into a school environment since we were students, and this time it's as a parent. So the responsibility and the role is quite different. And sometimes we can be triggered by our own past experiences at school. And it's about working through those triggers and really understanding ourselves and how we're actually approaching our child's education, as opposed to our own experience in school. Because I know myself, in my own experience, I had a terrible time at primary school, and as soon as I set foot on the school grounds again, it just all came back rushing back at me. And so had to work through that. And I've worked with a number of parents around those triggers, and really setting, I guess, aside some time to really think about how you want to approach your child's learning journey, and having a bit of a vision and a plan in place, and discussing it with your partner if you have a partner, and really just approaching it in a way that is a positive approach, and an optimistic approach too, and not fearing the worst, that your child is going to be cared for, and is going to be safe. But once again, you would get that feeling when you actually go into a school and meet the teachers and meet with the senior leadership as well. But also, perhaps, if your child is able to manage in going into the school themselves, to get a feel for the environment as well. So that way, okay, they feel comfortable here, or they feel safe here. And that sort of gives you a peace of mind as well. So we might just do a bit of a Q&A now. There's a couple
one in
of
there now,
questions
Rachel, that I can
Yeah.
see. Yeah.
So how much can
now.
you really expect from a school when you're asking them to support your child beyond how they would support neurotypical kids? In other words, how hard should you push to make sure your child is being supported without being too demanding or asking for too much? And that's a really good question, because obviously teachers have to be supporting all children, and but there are other people to support in the classroom as well. But perhaps you could elaborate on that, Amanda.
Yeah, look, I think with that is it's a really tough one for parents, and how much you should or you shouldn't push. But I think if it's all done in a respectful, positive way, rather than coming from a negative way, it's going to be received, reasonably well. Then, and I guess what I would say is I would never be too afraid to let let schools or teachers know about things to do with your child and what have you, because you're better off to have it up front than having to be dealing with the problem later, or when issues occur. And now issues will still occur potentially, obviously, anyway, that need to be dealt with. But it's educate. It's just providing that education and communication. And look, I'm a big one for telling parents to continue to email and advocate for their students or their children. And again, you're not going to get every teacher on board. I mean, it's different in primary school because you've obviously got a smaller number of teachers that you have to deal with. So it's a little bit different than at secondary school, where year level, where you've got 6 or 8 different teachers for your child at a year level. But again, you're not going to get them all on board, but if you can get the majority, then, I guess you're winning as well. And learning plans, like someone put before, you can have learning plans and things in place, and some teachers will follow through with them and others won't. And that can be a bit frustrating, but keep following up, keep trying to pursue to educate those other teachers as well, because sometimes they just don't really understand, or they don't know.
The other thing to consider is that you also need to respect the boundaries around too much communication, because if you're sending emails at midnight, or over the weekend, when teachers do need to have a break, because we need our teachers to be fresh for the Monday morning and for the week ahead, that is often seen as disrespectful, I guess, by educators, understandably. So is really considering, okay, this is a person on the other end of this email. I need to consider what I'm saying, and seeking support that is going to actually have a difference, make a difference for my child. I'm not sure what's happened. I think we've lost Amanda. So it's really about understanding the boundaries that you probably shouldn't cross, and really just being respectful to teachers as professionals as well. And 9 times out of 10 you'll get a positive response back from educators. So It really is about building a relationship is the best approach, because you'll find that most teachers are fairly receptive if you come at the situation with a level of respect and I guess a positive approch. So hopefully Amanda will
I got
join
so far
again.
until I'm back. I'm back.
Great. I thought you dropped out.
I'm wrapped that I got that far.
Yeah. So does anyone have any other questions? We've got 5 minutes left, so we've got time for a couple more questions. Hopefully we've addressed all the questions that we've got in the chat box. We'll just have a quick look. Just in terms of the question or the comment from Kerry on some staff in kinder childcare have knowledge of neurodiversity and others don't. That's quite an interesting point to make, and one that you can possibly explore further with early childhood, because you probably agree with this, Amanda, the earlier that children can be, I guess, identified, the early intervention is always the best approach. And that way, when the child is starting school, you're armed with information that you can share with educators. But I'm not 100% sure what training early childhood teachers do have. You would expect that they would have some knowledge, at least. But that's certainly something that maybe parents need to advocate at a government level, and to try and explore that further, so that children are being identified early.
Yeah, look, I agree with you completely. I think the more aware that they can be, and the supports that can be put in place earlier rather than later can make a huge difference.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, if no one else has got any other questions, what we'll do is we will share some information for you. Stop that for a sec. We'll share information. We've got all your email addresses, and so you've got Amanda's website address in the chat box there, and we can probably share some tip sheets and that sort of thing through email sometime in the future. I'll also be sending a feedback form from the webinar, and this webinar will be up for replay fairly soon as well. I'll just share some information that Amanda has some events coming up, and I do as well. So can everyone see that? Okay, so do you want to just share what's coming up for you, Amanda?
Yeah, so if you have got a child that's obviously going from year 6 to year 7 now or in the future, this is a webinar that I run every year. I also do a lot of one-on-one work to support children in that space as well. So which is the same sort of workshop too, but that can really assist them, on their journey to secondary school. So feel free, you can jump on my website if you want to know more as well, or have a bit more of a chat about your child. You can jump on there and through the Get in Touch page, book a 15-minute chat with me, and we can certainly talk more about what your needs are, or where things are at as well.
So you can just scan the QR code or find the information on the website. And I've got a webinar coming up next week with Meg Price, and we're going to be talking about AI, which is obviously a hot topic of discussion at the moment in education and for families. And we're just going to be talking about how to actually thrive as a family with AI, I guess, starting to infiltrate into our lives. And then the week after, I have another session with Dr. Lynn O'Grady, who is a psychologist with extensive experience working with children. And we're going to be talking about how to have hope in an uncertain world. And that's really exploring how we can support you as parents in navigating all the different challenges that are happening in your world and I guess around us that are impacting us as families and especially our kids. If anyone is interested in joining my Facebook group, I'll be sharing more webinars and information from people like Amanda, and other contacts that I have who are supporting parents as well. So you can scan the QR code to join the Facebook group. And just letting you know, I have a book available for parents that explores your role as your number one or your child's number one advocate. And Amanda's got her copy there. And that's available from Amber Press, just through that QR code. And I can send you a link to that as well. And that really helps you. It's pretty much the book that I wish I had when my kids were starting school. And it's a guide really to support you in understanding your various roles and really to help you navigate the journey with your children. There's other resources on my website as well, which is practicallylearning.com.au. And you can scan the QR code on the left for my website, and the one on the right is to book a conversation with me if you're interested in just talking about your situation and whether my services can support you as parents as well. So that brings me to the end of our webinar. Only 1 minute over, which is a record for me. Usually we go a bit more over than that. So thank you everyone for attending this evening. I will follow up with some emails, and I hope to see you on future webinars, and hopefully this evening has been helpful for you. And once again, the replay will be available soon if you need to have a look at it again or share it with other people that you feel might benefit from what we've talked about here tonight. So thanks again, and we will say good evening and hope you enjoy the rest of the night.